Welcome to the Eagle Valley Model Railroad. This video we're going to continue work on the mountain, and here we're using a wooden dowel to remove the masking tape that was placed on the track while we were plastering the mountain. It's a little bit finicky to do it, but the masking tape doesn't stick the best to the track, but it is enough where it takes just a little bit of effort to get it removed. And putting the wooden dowel between the rails and sliding it down through the mountain area tends to do the trick. When we put our plaster down, sometimes the plaster gets over into areas that we don't want it. It gets a little closer to the rails in some instances. And right here, we're just using a chisel to widen the right-of-way for the railroad. I like using the chisel on this. The plaster, of course, is set and is hard. And by using the chisel, it actually creates that look that I was going for, or that you go for, where they actually cut into the mountains to lay the road beds. So it actually gives those hard edges and those cuts. Again, right here, we're just removing some of the plaster and getting our right-of-way cleared up. That way we don't have any issues with the cars or engines making contact with our scenery. A little bit of cleanup here, and don't worry too much about the bright white showing from the plaster, or we're going to go back and touch those parts up with some paint. It's been a fun project with the mountain, just getting everything to look like we want it to, kind of change it up some. Those of you that's been with the channel a while remember what the old mountain looked like, and this is a nice change for the Eagle Valley. Right here, we're just making the entrance to the mountain. It was a little bit tight. I didn't show it, but I ran one of my taller cars down through here just to test the track, and we were hitting in some spots, so we were addressing those issues before we move forward. It's good once you start introducing some of the new scenery elements, just to put your most finicky or your biggest pieces of rolling stock and just do a quick roll through, just to make sure you don't have anything obstructing the way of your trains when they come through. Last thing you want to do is have a scene that's completely finished, and then you have some pieces of rolling stock that won't necessarily make it through what you've just done. So here all we're doing is finding those little areas that are showing some raw plaster, just where we've been messing around with it and we nicked the paint up. No rhyme or reason. There are some spots we've added that we just added some dark spots just to get some variation into the rock. That way it's not the most uniform color. I actually run out of my brown ground cover paint that I had, and all it was somebody had a pre-mix at the Home Depot or the Lowe's, and it was sitting under the shelf on the discount spot, and I grabbed it. And we've run out of it, and just grabbed some of my acrylic that was close. Probably could have went with a darker brown, but again, we're going to cover this with ground cover. This is just trying to get rid of that stark white from the plaster itself. Doesn't have to be the best of cover, and again, we're covering it with ground cover, plus we're going to come back with some ballast and gravel and fill in some of the areas as well. Just trying to knock down that bright white so it doesn't shine through and we don't have to use a ton of coverage to block it from view. And again, just using the different colors adds a variation. That way it's not such a uniform paint coverage. Once I do some changes to the area, I like to clean my tracks up. I actually do like to run a train, the engine, just to make sure we've got good continuity. Keep your tracks clean through the process, and it just makes for easier cleanup later on. Here we're starting the process of putting down our ground cover. We're going with the Georgia Red clay. This is white glue, school glue, Elmer's glue, whatever you want to call it. I haven't cut this down any. This is full strength, just using a smaller brush, and it's a pretty simple process. We're just adding glue where we want to put our scenery elements. This happens to be the Georgia Red clay that we processed, and just put a generous amount of glue down. And just like with everything else, the different amounts of glue that are down in the different areas, you're going to have a little bit more of your scenery element to stick in that spot. The lighter spots where the glue is, the dirt or sand or whatever you're putting it down, are going to be a little bit thinner, which is absolutely prototypical. I mean, you see that in real life. So I don't worry too much about having it all uniform and perfectly put down. And then as we introduce our Georgia Red clay, this is about the finest I wanted to get it. This has been processed a pretty good bit, and we absolutely put down a generous amount of the clay itself. And of course, we just work our way around the layout and repeat this process. And this clay I'm using actually come out of my backyard. Went and got a few shovelfuls, put it in a 5-gallon bucket. Had a few different size strainers, of course, starting off with the bigger size and just working your way down to as fine of clay or ballast or whatever you want to call it. Work your way down till you get it to the size that you want to use on your layout. I've gone through the process a couple of times, and it works pretty well for me. These are spice. This is a spice shaker that I'm using. I've got a few of them that we've emptied from the burgers and the steaks and things, and worked very well. Worked very well. I didn't worry about putting over any kind of stocking or anything like that. There are some guys that do that, and that'll really get you a fine layment of the material you're putting down. I wasn't really too terribly concerned about exactly how fine of a material I was putting, and what I had sifted through was fine, was good enough for me. So I chose not to use any kind of stocking or anything over the end of my shaker. as we're doing this and we're putting the clay down, sometimes you'll notice the thicker areas of the glue will actually start absorbing into the clay, and it'll turn a little bit darker color. It'll actually look wet. Once you run into that, what I've done is just added some more of the dry clay over top of it. The more it absorbs into the clay, the more layer you put on top of it, the more different definition you're going to get from that area. And for me, the more realistic it looks. I like the way it comes out. I like the way the finished product looks when we're done. You notice we're not just following the mountain all the way around. We're allowing the different areas to dry. I like doing it in small batches. It doesn't let the glue dry too much. I like to put it down on a really wet glue surface. I think the clay adheres a lot better. And if you don't let your glue start to dry. So we do it in small areas. Plus, as you're doing the process, you may or may not have enough material to cover everything at one time, because as it dries, you're going to, or at least I try to, is recover some of the loose material that didn't glue and didn't adhere to the surface. So I actually didn't have enough clay in my container to do the whole mountain in one shot. I actually had to let an area dry and then recover the loose material and reuse it and put it in a different area. So that drove us to not scenic the complete mountain in one go. It's kind of a do and redo and repeat, but it just shows how we're going through the different process of the left hand side has been done, the right hand side hadn't been done, and we've allowed it to dry and cleaned up just a little bit, and that way we're not pushing around loose clay with our paintbrush and glue. And again, any areas you see that are turning that darker color, just add you some extra ground cover to it, and it'll turn out real well. Nice using this shaker, being able to get those vertical walls. You can see we hadn't done the complete mountain. We got an area that needs to be continued on and done, and my bag's empty. Just got us old church sock, something kind of thin, and got it on the end of the shop vac. I was really surprised how much the clay packed into this sock. You really couldn't vacuum a whole bunch, and it really stopped the airflow from the shop vac. Contribute that to the fine job I did on getting this stuff to small particles. But just stay with it. I recovered a lot of material by doing this. It kept me from having to go back and process any more clay. I absolutely had enough to complete the whole mountain once I recovered what I could with this method. Now, you're not going to get everything like this. So I do suggest, once you've done this process, I've got a brush attachment that'll go on my shop vac, and I didn't put anything to catch any material. I just put the brush attachment on and went straight with the shop vac to get up the rest of everything that just wouldn't come off with this. But I was able to recover probably 1/4 of a bag of loose material that just hadn't dried. And I let that dry for a few days before I did this. This area under the bridge is such that it won't come up unless I didn't make it where it was easily removable. Hindsight, probably should have, but I didn't. So how do we get our ground cover under it? So this was the best thing I could come up with. And surprisingly enough, it worked really, really well. Just a piece of paper, added our scenery to it, and went to shaking it. Really tell right here under this lip. I was surprised it did as well as it did. Just got lucky, I guess. You can tell right here where the grass meets down at the bottom of the screen, that discoloration I was talking about. It looks like this, the clay right here is wet. Here in just a moment, I'll notice that, and we'll add some more clay right over that area. And I really pile up the clay in this. And then again, we repeat the process, put the sock on, vacuum it up, and then we continue on. Thanks for watching. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and until next time, happy modeling.